So let's go straight tonight into the big reservation debate on this day when a landmark judgment has been delivered by the Supreme Court that effectively affirms reservations on economic criteria in the general category. Are reservations the only way to ensure social and economic justice? Has it become impossible to end reservations in our country? Will this judgment ignite more demands for job quotas? Should reservations be based only on economic criteria in the future? Joining me now, Aman Lekhi, former Additional Solicitor General of India. I'm joined by Shadan Farasat, advocate at the Supreme Court. Annie Namala is Executive Director, Center for Social Equity and Inclusion. And Pavan Kumar Verma, former Member of Parliament from the Rajya Sabha. Appreciate all of you joining us. Let's turn first to the central legal question which was at the heart of this debate. Whether giving reservations to the general category on economic criteria is violative of the basic structure of the Constitution. The court has said no. Aman Lekhi, do you agree with what the court has said, with the majority judgment or the minority judgment which believes it violates the right to equality? You've kept the poor among SC, SC, OBCs out. Upper caste poor will now get the benefit of reservations.
Well, I don't agree with the majority judgment. I haven't had occasion to read the judgment, but on principles, I think it is flawed. And there are three reasons I give for that. One, if the permissible classification is economic, to deny the entitlement to a similarly situated individual on the ground of class will paradoxically itself violate Articles 15 and 16, which is untenable, firstly. Secondly, insofar as 16 is concerned or 15 is concerned, we deal with classes. What the amendment talks is sections. The class and section are mutually distinct, and the class which is in contemplation is one which is in some way disadvantaged because of the historical injustices that to suffer, as a consequence of which it is seen or perceived as one not to be included in the milieu of development. Now, this particular requirement of class, which in some way unites those entitled to benefits in the 15 and 16, would be absent across the elements of the sections which the 103rd Constitutional Amendment deals with, because insofar as the political, cultural, socio-historical conditions of those individuals are concerned, that will vary across. And what is actually contemplated with the Constitution is a horizontal, insofar as classification is concerned. A stratification is not horizontal, but in fact it is perpendicular, because there is a superiority, inferiority over there, which is actually absent in this particular scheme of the Constitutional Amendment. Third, as I feel, which you actually pointed out, the reservation has existed initially, when we talked caste-based reservation, privileged a particular kind of discrimination, and in fact there was a race to show that we have, that insofar as those entitled reservations are concerned, are backward classes or scheduled castes. We had various instances of people claiming to be so. So it's privileged being a subordinate. Now this will cause further disruption, because as far as entitlement is concerned, the economic criteria would be one, again, more or less disruptive, where people will actually move towards actually ensuring that they are economically deprived. And the reason for this is essentially the politics behind this entire mechanism, which leads to a bit of rent seeking where the system is concerned, because rather than working the system and improving the education infrastructure, or in fact working upon the representation as such, by reason of these SOPs, gateways are created which got nothing to do with development, which is fundamentally wrong, in my opinion, should not, and which the Supreme Court.
So you're saying it is fundamentally wrong to have brought in an economic criteria. You've made your point. You are saying it is fundamentally wrong to have brought in an economic criteria when the original criteria was social and educational backwardness. Now you brought in an economic criteria which is liable to be misused in some form. Shadan Farasat, do you agree with that? There will be those who will say at the end of the day, the poor, if I am from the general category and I come from a poor family, why should I not get the benefit of reservation? Why should reservations be reserved for those who may well have economic advantages but are socially and educationally backward? Remember, Dr. Ambedkar had said reservation should be only for 10 years.
Yeah, see, there were two issues before the court. Issue one was whether on economic criteria alone you can have reservations. On that issue, all the 5 judges are in agreement. They say you can. So there is no dissent on that point. All 5 are in agreement on the first point. It is on the second point, which is of exclusion. So once you say you can have reservation in economic criteria, then to exclude on the basis of caste, backward caste, OBCs and SC, STs, Is that permissible as per the basic structure? On that issue, 3 judges say yes, you can exclude, that doesn't violate basic structure. 2 judges, that is Justice Bhatt and Chief Justice Lalit, say no, you can't. Now, there is, I think, a fundamental distinction between the first and the second issue, which for your audience is very important to understand. Once we have understood that bit, then going forward, economic criteria is not a problem at all. But how do you give it, even by the logic of the reservation of 103rd Amendment, which is that, okay, you identify the poor. So let us identify the poor, no difficulty. But once you identify the poor, despite the fact that the person is poor and he is in fact Dalit, you are denying him. So what the dissenters are saying,
one minute, Shadan, a poor Dalit is already getting the benefit under the existing SC/ST quota. So why a general category poor person whose family income was less than 8 lakhs as per what has been defined has never got that benefit. Now he gets it, even if it's 10%.
See, first, Rajdeep, we should stop calling it general category, because in general category, even a backward caste OBC or SC/ST can participate. That's the general category. What this category is a forward caste quota. Let us accept it. What was devised in the 103rd Amendment was for economically weaker section of the forward caste.
That's right.
Was not for general category. Okay. Now, if in that, so just because you are getting quota somewhere else, that is, what is the logic of this? That people are economically deprived. If despite the fact that your group has historically gotten quotas and the data was before the court, in fact, the very report which is the basis of this passing this amendment said that the SC/STs and the backward class are the poorest amongst the poor in India, despite having reservation for 70 years. So if that is the actual factual status of these groups on the ground, then where is the question of excluding them from a quota which they because remember, if 50% they had access, in general they had full access. Now you have carved out 10%, which was earlier available to them, and you have excluded the backward class from this. That's why the dissenting judges have said that this is heaping further injustice on the already discriminated.
No, just for clarification very quickly, Shadan, there is already existing 49% reservation OBC, SC, ST, am I correct?
Correct, you're right.
Now we will have 10% for economically backward upper caste, am I correct?
Yes.
So 59%. The existing 49% is not being touched.
Yes, but please understand this. So you had 49% reservation existing. You had remaining 51% for the general, correct?
Yes.
Now in the general, if on my own score, even though I am a Dalit, I got enough score to get through the general, I could access the general category, correct? That's why I said please make a distinction between forward caste quota and general.
Okay, got it.
So from that 50%, you have taken out 10% and made it exclusively forward caste quota. You understand now? And that is why, that is going from my kitty which was earlier available to me.
Okay.
Now I can't compete.
Those are legal arguments which are, as I said, very, very complex arguments which might explain why it's such a split verdict. But Annie Namala, as someone who has fought for reservations, for Dalits, for backward castes, for OBCs to make a society more inclusive, there will be those who will turn around and say, and it's an example often given, why should a Ramvilas Paswan's son get the benefit of reservation? That reservation must have a finite time limit, and it is important to have some element of an economic criteria even within the concept of social and economic backwardness, which at the moment is still purely defined by and large through the prism of caste.
Thank you, Rajdeep. I would also concur with my other panelists in considering this as an unfortunate judgment. Because why I would say that is like, the very basis of reservation has been on historical disadvantages, caste, and other issues. And we have today, with this judgment, we have totally turned it away into looking at an economic category which is much more fluid and manipulative. So for one, I feel that the constitutional provisions given under the caste and other disadvantages will be undermined. And I am bringing this from my own experience of the RTE Act, which has 25% reservation under disadvantaged and economically weaker section children in private schools. My experience of working on it for 10 years is that everyone, the public and including the bureaucrats, they forget the disadvantaged category. They think that all children can be brought into the economically weaker section category, and you don't really need to specifically look at disadvantage.
No, no,
I
how?
feel
How?
this,
No, no, are you saying that the numbers get manipulated? Is that what you are saying? That this economically
when it is,
backward category results in fake manipulation? Is that what you are saying?
it results in fake manipulation because the poorest don't have income certificates, and it is only the little better off that can have, but that is beside the point. My point is that the whole, while the reservation is meant for disadvantaged and the economically weaker sections, it ends up being called only the economically weaker sections because that is more acceptable to the public and the bureaucrats. And this way I feel, as we start giving economic reservations on the economic basis, my fear is that the dissent, the social, the categories of caste and others would be done away
Well,
in sooner or later.
you know, it's very
That's
interesting.
my fear.
You didn't answer my central question. Why should Ram Vilas Paswan's son, a minister's son, get the benefit of reservation?
In a perfect way, he would not get it. But in the imperfect way of implementation, he would get it. Just like what we would say an economically weaker section person can manipulate the income certificate. In the perfect way, Ramvilas Paswan's son may not get it. But in the imperfect way, he would get it. And the fear of the economic categorization is that more and more imperfections will be brought and embedded in the system.
Okay, it's only 10%. Shadat, you raised your hand before I go to Pawan Verma very
quickly. Can I answer that question? Can I answer that question? Ram Vilas Paswan's son can still get reservation because he represents the Dalits in otherwise a space where Dalits are not represented. So he is not getting that space because he is individually discriminated or deprived. He is getting that space in a representational capacity to represent the interest of Dalits. That is one of the aspects of representation and reservation which is often missed out.
Shadan, that's a very contentious issue. Pawan Verma, why don't you take... No, because at the end of the day then, in a society which is unequal, Indian society is unequal and caste is an important element, perhaps critical element of that inequality. No one denies that. But Pawan Verma, are the floodgates being opened now? Essentially now we've already had states like Tamil Nadu, and I'll put all those states up, which actually have 69% reservation. You've got many other states with 60%, and you've got groups like Jats, Marathas also pleading for reservation. Given this judgment, you're essentially opening up, some would say, the floodgates. Even the 50% criteria the court said today by the majority judgment is no longer inviolable. It can be violated.
Rajdeep, I'd like to make 4 or 5 quick points. Firstly, I am for affirmative action, but when structural change within society towards a more equitable society is slow and inadequate, affirmative action and increasing its ambits becomes the default option. That is the truth. I believe that scheduled castes, scheduled tribes and later OBCs historically discriminated against need affirmative action. But today we are perhaps one of the most unequal societies in the world. 1% of India owns 73% of its wealth. In the last 7-8 years or a decade, billionaires' income have gone up 10 times, the poor's income has gone up 1%. So when governments cannot fulfill expectations by required structural change, they resort to increasing the ambit of affirmative action. Second point, when we talk of the poor, the fact of the matter is that 51% of the poor in this country are scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Add to that, 38% of the OBCs are categorized as poor by any verifiable criteria. Therefore, among those who are not SC, ST or OBC, the number of the poor is only 14.4%. If that is the case, why should they necessarily have a monopoly on power, privilege, access, opportunity and education, which is larger than the number of the poor in their country? Having said that, I want to raise my fourth question. even if we accept, and I actually support, strangely when I was with Mr. Nitish Kumar in the JDU, in our manifesto we put in at that time a 10% quota for the economically weaker sections. My question is, how efficacious is this? One of your panelists rightly raised the question that this is a smoke screen. Where are the government jobs? Have existing vacancies been filled? That is the question. So therefore, when you provide this, it's for education and government jobs, which is not the answer, even though I believe, given the unequal society we have, we need to have affirmative action.
No, you keep using the word affirmative action, which somebody else will use as reservation. You're saying this is affirmative action that is absolutely necessary to reduce inequalities in society. Now, inequalities in society exist at two levels: the social, educational backwardness of communities, but there is also inequalities in terms of income, which you highlighted. So, if I am today an upper caste, a forward caste who has not got the benefit of reservations, and my family earns an income less than 8 lakhs, should I also not get affirmative action? In principle, as you said, Nitish Kumar had agreed upon it. This now goes a step forward and says economically disadvantaged forward caste.
Therefore, I say yes, but the forward castes do not constitute 40% of the population. But I still say that given your inability to solve structural problems leading to greater equity, this is your only smoke screen. Increase affirmative action. My last point is, we must and we should and we need to have done earlier, we have to eliminate the creamy layer from the reserved categories in order to provide greater space for those who genuinely need it. I think that's a question of Mr. Ramvilas' first one as a metaphorical question. But I think we need to act on that. There are generations after a certain point, because income is the criteria, now you said it. Of course, they have been socially and educationally backward. And this is for 3,000 years, so it takes time. But where is the cutoff finally? The cutoff also needs to be defined.
So therefore, do you agree that, this would be much more effective in a way, Aman Lekhi, the majority judgment, if the creamy layer was removed? You see, one of the objections that led eventually to forward castes protesting and now political parties reaching out, particularly the Modi government and the BJP, is they wanted to reach out to forward castes as well. If you remember, this happened post the Madhya Pradesh elections of 2018 when the BJP took a hit. And the BJP then decided we need to reach out to forward caste. What do? We give them 10% reservation. But in the process, what happens to the so-called creamy layer? There are creamy layers today within the SC, ST, OBC. It is watching them that a section of the forward caste seem to believe that we are losing out while the creamy layer continues to get benefits. Now you've got other groups, Marathas, Jats, all of whom are dominant agrarian castes who also want reservation. So is should the court also make greater effort to ensure that any system keeps the creamy layer out?
No, the creamy layer is to be out in any case. That's the law. In fact, that's the reason why we weed out those who are disentitled to reservation among the socially, educationally backward classes from those who are entitled. And that principle is in place. If Ramvilas Paswan's son gets a benefit, that's a system of a system not working. Because as far as the system is concerned, the system will exclude it. That said, what I want to bring is that these are substantive issues which should not be made subject to political gimmickry. What actually happens is that economic policy and the eventual development will not actually be identified the particular individual. And in a personalized system of democracy which we have, we need to have measures by which an individual or a group of individuals, the party can take benefit. Now, because reservation is concerned, it is something which is tangible and straightforward and immediately know that the party or individual has actually given that benefit. So there is a public acclaim because the benefit is being given, and without there being much change on the ground, by reason of the fact that this facility is made available, there is general happiness all around. This is a classical system in the social menu of what is rent seeking, in which you get more benefit out than what actually is invested into the system. Because while the system remains in the stagnant state it is, without there being a substantial improvement, there is a general illusion of some work happening, in the sense of there being some positive movement towards more participation.
You're saying it's
the result is in fact...
It's essentially short-circuiting the system. You are short-circuiting the system by offering these reservations almost as SOPs, is what you seem to suggest, rather than actually effecting substantive change. I come back to my concern, Shadan Farasat, as a result, that when we look at some of the dominant agrarian castes who are also pushing for reservations, Marathas pushed for it, the Supreme Court did not accept it, but there will be a renewed push for that as well. So it's not just today, it's not just forward caste, 10% economically backward forward caste, but dominant communities, Patidars, Jats, Marathas are all pushing for quotas.
No, that is correct. So I think a whole part of the forward caste grievance is, look at the backward caste, they have reservations, we don't.
Yes.
Now, the equality, and that's the grievance which we often hear, and in drawing room conversations. But that doesn't work. You see, the constitutional architecture is not to give reservation for the sake of giving reservation. The reservation has to be justified on a certain ground. Now, if the upper caste have historically been the better off in the society, the forward caste, they don't need it. Now, in this case, an exception was made for the economically poor within the forward caste. I can still at some level understand, okay, economically poor, although they have not faced discrimination, but because of poverty they face challenges, therefore reservation. But then where is the logic to exclude the backward caste who are not just poor, who may be as poor or in fact as data shows poorer, but in fact facing discrimination also, especially Dalits. And just one aspect on creamy layer. You see, creamy layer, there is no concept of creamy layer for SC/STs. There is a concept of creamy layer for OBCs. So OBCs creamy layer are excluded, SC/ST everybody is included. That is why a Paswan's son, who's also Dalit, is included, and his economic criteria is not relevant. And that's why I made the representational point, because these, especially Dalits, have historically been so underrepresented. This is a question of not just his personal situation, which may, as you rightly point out, be very good, but in fact is a representational capacity which is representing, and that's why there is no care for Dalits.
Let me ask you therefore, Annie, if you had to change this system, what would you prefer, given your experience, as you said, with schools that have this form of reservations for economically disadvantaged? How would you feel a little bit more secure that the system is one that works, that those who genuinely are deprived are getting the benefits, whether income deprived or whether deprived because of historical reasons?
See, Radeep, I think first of all, we need to recognize that the system is not functioning. If it is a school, if it is a health, any of the service systems that you're looking at, it's not functional. If it is functional, it should take care of its vulnerable and poor and marginalized in its natural form. I also want to bring to light this whole, how the whole narrative has changed. See, earlier, anytime you talk of reservation, the narrative is merit versus reservation. Today, there's no question of merit. So it is so easy to understand how the dominant can, it can hide certain narratives, it can bring in certain narratives, and the power and the privileges will actually guide and push these narratives, and others will be subsumed. And that's where I fear that the historically disadvantaged will lose out in this process, because finally it would be the economic criteria that will be put into the forefront and other narratives will be lost. And there I think we would be going more and more into unequal situations rather than overcoming the inequality or addressing the disadvantages.
So therefore,
unless you put the systems in place that can function, that can meet the needs of the vulnerable as its first priority, I don't think we can think of non-rent seeking as a pattern.
Okay, let me therefore ask you in conclusion, Pawan Verma, is this at the end of the day, it's all about politics, stupid? As I said, politically today, no political party can afford to oppose reservations of any kind. And therefore, they keep expanding and they keep becoming, effectively a weapon of political empowerment as well. Social and education backwardness, yes, but they are political weapons today. And therefore, at the end of the day, whatever happened to the grand Ambedkarite vision that they need to have a finite time limit? Are we saying that it will take decades, particularly because government jobs are getting less and less. End of the day, government jobs are getting less and less. Existing vacancies, as you pointed out, are not being filled up. What does the government do? Have more reservations.
You see, Dr. Ambedkar, in my view, was a committed activist for greater social equality, but he was also an optimist. In 10 years, you could not have achieved this, and in 70 years plus, we have not been able to achieve it. That's the truth. Even today, Rajiv, I'll say finish in 30 seconds, there is a bias against reservation because somehow people link it to merit. Now, as far as merit is concerned, those who are privileged in whatever way, socially or economically, they don't have two craniums. They also have the same brain. It has just been given greater opportunity, and we need to do that for the vast numbers of our unequal society. I still believe that affirmative or reservations are not going to be the answer for the rising inequality and lack of economic opportunities today in India. It may seem as if it's a transient panacea, because as you said yourself, government jobs are shrinking and the unemployment rates are at unprecedented levels. So I think this is ultimately a way of hiding the stark realities of the system.
Okay. I think that's a somber and sobering note on which to end this contentious issue that exists and will continue to exist as to how far do you stretch reservations and why reservations are ultimately necessary in a deeply unequal stratified society like ours. I often point out, just look at our newsroom. How many Dalits, STs and OBCs do we have in our newsroom? And sometimes that raises questions about how unequal a society we are. That I don't know of how many Dalit editors, for example, this country actually has. 75 years after independence, we remain a deeply divided society, a discriminatory society in a way at various levels when it comes to equal opportunity. Think about that. But I appreciate my guest joining me on my top talking point.